Good morning, dear friends. Fifth day of Tishrei, 5 days into a new year. 5783, Tuf Shin Pei Gimel, a Hakel year. We are studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Kuf Lamed Hey, Masechet Shabbat, chapter 19, page 135a. Oh, I should say it is the final day of September 30th. And so the clock is running and leaping and jumping. If anybody local needs a lulav and esrog that's on the Gemara Chabura, send me a text message and I'll put you down on the list. You don't have to deal with the whole form and stuff. Just let me know and I'll add you on. Dr. Hammer, shall I put you down while we're talking?
Please.
Okay. All righty.
We had a problem in Canada Customs letting in the Arba Minim. They had to negotiate.
So we're studying the Talmud today, and let's wish once again a happy birthday to Rabero. In our community, we don't celebrate a birthday for one day. Pasternak. Okay, I'll put the Pasternaks on. Our community, our Gemara community, we don't celebrate a birthday for one day. We celebrate a birthday for several days. And so, Rebel, here we have a 3-day birthday celebration honoring your birthday. And we wish you again a lot of mazel and bracha to you, your family, and to all the members of your Talmud Chabur. Yesterday's discussion was dominated by the question of an androgynous, a person that a hermaphrodite in contemporary literature, although the word hermaphrodite, I believe, comes from Greek or Latin, so it's certainly not a newly invented word. I didn't get a chance to do a lot of research. I heard a clip. They said maybe there have been 400 reported cases in medical history. I don't know if that number is high or low. Thankfully, not too common, but the halacha is concerned about considering I'll tell you this much. In times of the Gemara, it must have happened enough that people were aware of it to the point where it was relevant for discussion. Pastor Nax, I have you down. I got you down. Professor, if you'll allow me, I also put one down for you as a gift for the members of the Chabura. Mark, I don't deliver to Israel, nor New Jersey, nor Canada. I'm sorry, but
by the way, just as an aside,
in Israel.
you mentioned Latin and Greek. The good thing about those languages is that besides masculine and feminine, there's a neutral or neuter category. So when they talk about things, it doesn't have to be plural. Whatever it is, it's something which is neither one nor the other.
Interesting. So here is something actually interesting. The Talmud uses the word androgynous. Androgynous actually, Shabbos. Androgynous actually has a Greek sound. Yeah. More than hermaphrodite, which I think is probably Latin.
Right. I think you're right.
That's just the interesting thing is the Talmud prefers the word androgynous. I believe the Talmud also had the word hermaphrodite. It's possible that the Gemara intentionally chooses the word androgynous over hermaphrodite for a simple reason, which is that the story of the word hermaphrodite, which means male and female, is based on, based on the mythical gods, and hermaphrodite is the fusion of one god and another to have another god that had male and female aspects. And so it's not surprising that the Talmud would prefer a word that does not have a connotation or inspiration by Avodah Zarah. And thus, androgynous, I believe, is just, again, I don't know exactly, but I know that the androgen or whatever, there is a male and female illusion in the word as opposed to hermaphrodite, which has an Avodah Zarah inspiration. Dr. Hammer? I
might be wrong because I just took a couple of years of Latin, but and I didn't take Greek, but in Latin, the U.S. It suggests male. So it might be similar to what the Gemara, when we're talking about it, that they're using this as basically this is a male body which has this deviation from being a normal or regular male. Possible.
Interesting. Yes. I'll tell you this: the Gemara talks, and the reason the Gemara talks about, and I know this more from the Rambam as well, in many different halachic contexts, where there is a nafkamina between male and female in their halachic obligation or halachic contribution. So there is frequent reference to androgynous as a question or as a ambiguous category which needs some clarification. Again, I didn't find, but I'm sure there's an article. I mean, I actually did see links. I just didn't have a chance to open it. And unfortunately, if you want to Google today androgynous or any of these words, there's a lot of things to sift through because of contemporary, discussions. And I prefer, at least for the purpose of our chabura, to restrict conveying the halachic perspective. And so it will take a little more research, but I'm sure there are likutim that collect all the different halachic discussions about androgynous, and suffice it to say, as we've seen and will continue to see, there are actually different opinions in the Mishnah itself. But that was all really an introduction to say that we then moved on.
From a practical point of view, if we think about it, once there are some male symptoms, they have to deal with it halachically. If it's a female, there's no question of the body this way or that way for any reason yet.
What you're saying, I believe, is that with a bris,
exactly, they have to know what
tissue that is removed in the ceremony of bris. That tissue is present, then you can remove it. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're asking or resolving the global question of the identity of the individual. We're dealing with a specific issue, which is there the tissue which is traditionally removed in a bris, can it be removed here? And then we're going to say you should. The reason, and that seems to be the settled halacha, where it becomes ambiguous, and the reason why we even bring it up is because of the suffix aspect. Do we consider this person a suffix if they need to have a bris or not? And be based on how you look at that person, is it done on Shabbos? Because if you remember, all of our discussion comes back to, is it done on Shabbos? Which leads me to the second and equally controversial issue. It's like it's like if you wanted to find a launch pad for many contemporary contentious topics in one spot, I might say that Kuf Lamed Hey, Kuf Lamed Dalet, Kuf Lamed Hey might be a good place to spark those conversations, because we went from talking about the androgynous to the question of a baby who's born prematurely and if they're perceived halachically to be living or not living. And again, I want to reiterate what I said yesterday, which is that in the time of because we're going to be discussing this today briefly, in the time of the Gemara, it was understood that there were two possible successful phases of gestation. A baby, and again, this is not to reflect science, the medicine that we know, but this was the understanding in the time of the Mishnah, that a baby could possibly be conceived and born 7 months later. That was one type of baby. This is the understanding. I'm not asserting this as fact, but I'm telling you what the Gemara knows, so we understand its comments. It is possible for a baby to be conceived and then born 9 months later, but all other situations where the baby is not born either at 7 or 9 months, the baby is premature. So 8 months old means the baby should have been born at 9, and tragically they were born early. And then of course 6 months, 5 months. What's the problem with being born premature? Well, in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, they did not have all of the medical wonders that today allow us to stabilize and to keep alive and to help the baby continue to thrive and develop even after being born, like we have today. And so thankfully, many babies are born 5, 6, 7, 8 months, and they're able to be nursed to good health and full development. That was not the case in the Gemara. Doctor?
How do you think they measured when the baby was conceived to be able to talk about when the baby was born? When it's 7 months?
I don't know. Possibly the way we do today, which is the way pregnancy usually works is the absence of a period usually gives an estimation,
which has wiggle room, as they say.
Right. Indeed. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I know there's some people that are in Florida. There's a very high tendency to do C-sections in the different medical cultures. Right. And so I know there are people that if there's a little bit of a wiggle room, they might fudge a little bit the last period to give them a little more space before they would.
Right. So I don't know how they did it then.
But I don't know, but I'm assuming it was probably an estimation. But the estimation, and that might also explain maybe there's sometimes the possibility of discharge or bleeding that could be seen as a period, and so maybe I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't think there was a very rigid medical process, but we shouldn't underestimate their awareness of different parts of human biology. And in general, women, not always, but many times, can be quite attuned to their bodies. And but whatever, the science of the fact is less relevant. We can look at a baby and see that the baby is premature. What we don't understand is the 7 part, but we can that's not really what's important here. What's really important here is the 8-month-old baby that's born premature, and the way halacha looks at them. The halacha looks at them as, unfortunately, practically or barely alive. And we're going to see the Gemara is going to have a discussion. So it's not like cut and dry. There's a lengthy discussion. And the other reality is that in order to understand and clarify the halacha of a premature baby, we're going to introduce other facets of biology where there are premature births, including in the animal kingdom. And this is, of course, not to be offensive to a newborn baby, but to understand how halacha looks at someone or a creature that is born early. Are they considered a viable living creature, or do we consider them for certain purposes to not be a sustainable life?
Halachically, in a case of an androgynous, how does that work with regard to, in general? Do they follow male or female obligations or kulot as far as mitzvot shazman kraman? You have an androgynous that we decided he's going to have mila later on when they grow up and mature and become. They have ilchot nida maybe?
So I kind of answered and not answered your question by just saying that there is a lengthy discussion throughout halacha about the treatment of an androgynous, and so I addressed it without giving the answer. So I'm gonna stick with that answer for now until we can find some kind of comprehensive text that I can share with you with authority. So it's a good question. It's not only a good question that it's a question that indeed the Gemara considers frequently. If you wanted me to give you a non-answer, I'll tell you that the halacha considers this individual a suffix, and so a suffix sometimes experiences chumrah, a suffix many times experiences kula, leniency, and so there ends up being a whole set of different halachas, which it's not a top of my mind, so I'm not able to give it all. I'm not able to rattle it all off to you. But if I'll find a malaket that collects the halachas of the androgynous, or if I can collect someone that gives a one-line explanation beyond what I said, I will share that.
Rabbi,
Yes,
Menachem, if I remember correctly, there's a whole discussion about getting married. Should they get married? Shouldn't they, etc.
And how do they get married? Indeed, there are many questions. It comes up in almost every Masechta, as I recall. But again, I don't have a fresh. I think also, although we say androgynous as a single category, I think the reality is that in the person that we're describing as androgynous, there are ultimately different possible underlying medical conditions that could lead to the androgynous. It could be a chromosomal, it could be, and so it's possible that there isn't a true single kind of person called an androgynous. And many times in babyhood, there's one presentation. And then as the individual matures into puberty and beyond, it may become clear that they are essentially a male with a female, with an aberration that appears female, or they could be a female with an aberration that appears to be male, and that might also influence the ultimate direction they take. Dr. Hammer?
Just as an aside, two days ago, Chovevei, which is a liberal Orthodox Rabbi Weiss, pinnacle, blah, blah, appointed the first director of outreach for the LGBTQ community, with one of the main foci to educate rabbis to be able to deal with these issues as well as their congregants. So it's just a sign of whatever, of sort of what's happening in more left-wing Orthodox circles.
No, indeed, it's a reality that's coming to every shul and every family. And again, I think before even talking about any specific approach, the importance is the essential importance of sensitivity and respect. And every person needs to be treated with human dignity and understanding, even before we know exactly what the halacha has to say. I think if the initial approach is to look at every person as an individual, worthy of all of the respect and dignity and understanding that we could possibly afford them, I think that is, the most essential initial perspective. I do want to add, and I know we're going off topic, and I'm going to have to end early, but on Rosh Hashanah, so we had the privilege, some of us, to meet up on the beach. Prior to that shofar blowing, we had a shofar blowing in South City Beach Park, which is between Lamar and Lamar Beach Club. And that's where I actually had the privilege to meet a number of Nadels and Hammers a year prior.
Right.
And when I arrived, there was one Russian Jewish woman, and it was already the set time to do the shofar. So I said, okay, come, let's blow the shofar. Rabbi, I'm by myself. You can't blow the shofar just for me. So I said, what do you mean I can't blow the shofar just for you? You don't think you're worth it? I said, today is Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, we commemorate the creation of humanity. And Hashem created mankind with one individual, or one couple. And the idea is that one person is worth the whole world. So I said, what do you mean that? Of course, we can blow the shofar for you. I've never seen a person gain 6 inches. She literally straightened up and became so full of pride. It was the most beautiful, special thing. Now, again, I wish people should appreciate that and know that without a rabbi, I have to say that, but to feel like she was important enough for the rabbi to, and in the end, we had 30 people there, and she ended up being my assistant rabbi. She was helping me, but it was to me, it was a beautiful moment to experience how a teaching of the Torah could give a person such a sense of importance. And for me, that I would say that was a highlight of Rosh Hashanah. And we need to remind. I think everyone needs a reminder that Jewish perspective, every person is worth it. Doctor?
No, I just want to know if I could quote you in the newspaper that the rabbi of Chabad Ocean Drive has a new assistant rabbi who's a female. It's okay. Okay.
If you want to get me fired.
No.
All right. Well, I never even shared the screen. This has all been the preamble. But essentially, that's the story. That is the story that our Gemara is discussing. The baby that is born prematurely. The halacha considers a premature baby to not be considerably viable. Thus, for the purposes of our discussion, would we be Mechalel Shabbos? And that's really the question we're getting down to. Are we Mechalel Shabbos for a baby who's not even really necessarily fully alive, and therefore maybe we don't Mechalel Shabbos or not? That is the essence of the question. We need to understand a little more the rationale behind it. Why would the viability of the baby be nogeya? Why would it be nogeya? If the baby's viable, we'll give a bris. If the baby's not viable, we won't give a bris. So, okay, here we are. Amar. Again, we saw this yesterday. I want to read it again, and I'm going to have to go in 10 minutes. But so let's get in a few lines of Gemara today. Although, of course, I think sometimes the introduction is equally enriching and important. But let's go. Amar. We said in the above Raisa that a baby that is, or in our Mishnah too, a suffix does not push aside Shabbos. What would be a scenario of suffix? What does that mean? Because the Brisa also specifies many specific subcategories. It's coming to address this discussion, this question in a Brisa. Ben Shiva Mechal in Olav as a Shabbos. A baby who is a viable baby, they're born to term, even if it's a 7-month term, again, understanding the halacha and the science of the time. Mechal in Olav as a Shabbos. You look at the baby is healthy, he's born after 7 months. This is a viable baby. The baby is alive and kicking. We are Mechal Shabbos to circumcise the baby. Uben Shmoina, if the baby is 8 months old, which means it's a premature baby that needed to have been born at 9 months. Ein Mechal and Olav as a Shabbos, so this baby does not get a bris, we don't mechal Shabbos for this baby. Now, I should point out that there are different ways to decipher this Gemara. Rabbi Steinsaltz reads into these words. We said ben shmoina mechalin, ben shiva mechalin, ben shmoina ein mechalin, suffik ein mechalin. Let's look at Rabbi Steinsaltz. To circumcise of a child born after 7 months, 1, desecrates Shabbos. 2, circumcise. So he adds in that the full context of the brisa is about bris milah. Others translate it a little more ambiguously, as if it's a general statement about the baby. And in this context, the relevance is bris. Let's read Rashi. Ben ches ein mechalan olav shaharei kemesu. Tragically, we look at this premature baby with the reality of that time, which is the baby is, for all intents and purposes, a non-viable baby. He or she is as good as dead. And this is not intended to be insensitive to the incredible pain that parents would feel at that point. It's just understanding halachically, this baby has very, very small odds of surviving, and that has influence in the halachic treatment of this baby.
Rabbi, you didn't finish what Rabbi Steinsaltz says, the most important part you left out. What does he say about 8 months?
Which part did I not leave off? And maybe I'm going back and forth.
You didn't finish the paragraph. With regard to 8 months of pregnancy, then I'm cut off with what he said.
So hold on. Let's see Rashi, and then we can revisit it if you don't mind. Sharei kumeso ve'ein milasei mitzvah. The baby is practically dead. The mitzvah is, there's no mitzvah to circumcise an unliving baby. The baby is technically alive, but as good as dead. Now, I know this really confuses my sense of how halacha says that even if there's the slightest suffix, we are mechal Shabbos to save a life. So I just want to point out here, we're not talking about being mechal Shabbos to save a life. Here we're talking about being mechal Shabbos to do a bris on a baby, which although we're going to try our best to keep the baby alive, we don't suppose the baby is going to live, and therefore the baby might not need a bris at all because this might be a non-living or non-viable baby. Again, I understand if this makes you feel uncomfortable, it makes me feel a little uncomfortable too, but that's, at this point, the gist of what we're saying. Again, shahari kamesu. This baby is as good as dead. Ve'emi lasei mitzvah. There's no commandment to circumcise this baby. Now the Gemara is going to say, Ikasha, if you're going to ask a very good question, Him kain lav chilo. The baby's dead. So then the procedure you're administering.
Could you leave what you display on the screen a few lines more? Because
That's what I asked for.
I will in a minute.
Oh,
I will in
okay.
a minute. The reason why I didn't is because I know that it's confusing if I'm presenting Rashi and the Steinsaltz says a different take. So then Rebero is going to ask me, that's not what the Steinsaltz says. So I want you to understand that I'm not telling you what Steinsaltz says. We're looking at Rashi, and then we're going to scroll down and see Steinsaltz further. So I don't mean to be, I'll scroll down, but I'll ask you not to ask me questions on Shaharei Kemeso ve'emi lasei mitzvah. Ikashim kein lav chilahu. Maybe you'll ask a question. A baby that's not alive, if the baby's alive, you're giving a live child a baby. If the baby's dead, you're only chopping the foreskin off of a dead baby. There's no chilul Shabbos. So later on, Rashi says the Gemara is going to understand this Gemara a little differently. Now we can go back to Rabbi Steinsaltz. A 7-month baby, you could desecrate Shabbos. An 8-month baby, he's presumably not going to survive. We don't mechal Shabbos. And even for the circumcision of a child with regards to whom there is uncertainty, which again, this is the Gemara I didn't read yet. Safek ben Shiva, Safek ben Shmaina. For one, that there is uncertainty if the baby is 7 months or 8 months. Ein mechal and all of us a Shabbos, that baby too does not get Shabbos desecration. Rebero, oh, you're on the phone.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Is it possible that one explanation is that if a child, we don't expect that child to survive, that by doing it, the trauma or the stress will just cause death to come sooner?
So that was on my mind.
Yeah.
But that's not that doesn't seem to be the Gemara's thought process. So either the Gemara doesn't see this as something that's going to hasten the baby's departure, but I was actually thinking your question. Forget Chil Shabbos.
Right.
Don't we not give a bris to a baby who's in a precarious situation?
Right.
So how are we giving a bris to a most precarious baby who we're actually doubtful the baby is going to survive?
Right.
So I don't have a very good answer for you. I think we need to learn the balance of the Gemara to see how the Gemara ultimately understands this. But that is indeed something that's been on my mind. Why would we even consider circumcising this baby? Forget the question of Chilul Shabbos for bris. Let's talk about the prohibition of hastening the death of a living being.
Just another thing that popped into my mind, which is, I guess, psychological. I think that if you're going to do the bris, part of the bris, let's do a continuation play, is the naming, okay? And from experience, I know that it's quite different when there's a miscarriage and the baby was never named versus a baby who dies within the first couple of weeks but has been named. I think it's somehow giving the baby a name does something to the parents and whatever. And it's not, it might sound good, but in the long run, I think it's.
So you're saying there's a sense of almost sensitivity to not force the parents to go through certain life cycles that are associated with a living, viable baby, which will then further traumatize them. That is certainly something that makes a lot of sense. For some reason, I'm doubtful that that's the ultimate motivation behind this halacha, but it's certainly an added benefit, let's say, that if we're not certain that the baby is going to be viable, why put the family through that situation?
Okay, just a thought.
No, good thing to consider. So again, let's just back up to understand what really happened over here. The Gemara quotes a brisa that says that when we said Sofek Deiches Shabbos, we're talking about the kind of question of is the baby premature or not. Now, based on this reading, it seems like there's a little bit more of a magical. If the baby's premature, the baby's not going to live. If the baby's mature, born to term, the baby is going to live. And if you're not sure, all you need to do is figure out how far into the pregnancy the baby is, and that will determine if the baby is going to be viable or not. So I'm not sure why we have such a. I guess the baby is not quite. Probably the baby, just as it presents, is not as premature, is not as limited as a full-fledged preemie, but yet is clearly a premature baby. That's how I think we need to understand this. So let's see, the brisa continues. Ben Shmoina. So this is a conversation that is not connected immediately. Oh, I should say one more thing. The contemporary poskim, Chazon Ish, I know is quoted, many others, clarify that today we do not have a sense of the premature baby with all of these restrictions. Some of the halachists say that nishtanu hativim. We've seen this a few times in our Gemara, where the biological reality, the medical reality of human beings today, for whatever reason, are different than they were once, or similar sentiment. So all that we're studying today may have been extremely relevant in the time of the Gemara, but today this is more of an academic discussion and allows us to probe certain theories of Suffolk, but to understand before we even go on to the next statements of the Gemara, to understand that that is not the halachic behavior today, based on the fact that things are very different.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I imagine today, if we think of the halacha based on this, you would call a moil. The bris is due on Shabbos. He examines the baby, and he says, sorry, I wouldn't mechalel Shabbos for this baby, but then you could call another moil who might do it.
I'm confused. You're saying if the baby's premature?
No, I'm saying how far we go.
You're saying how would we know if a baby is considered precarious or very healthy? And you're saying that's a determination the moil makes?
Yeah, I'm saying today it might be a decision that a moil makes. Each moil, we don't have that exact halacha based on.
No, well, today this whole halacha is academic because today even a premature baby is viable, or at least very, very far back. And additionally, as Dr. Hammer pointed out, we are not going to do a bris on a baby that is in a precarious medical state. We'll allow the baby to heal. And then we'll do the bris once the baby is discharged and robust. And, and so this is all essentially an academic discussion. Yeah, suffice it to say, we're still in the infancy. We are still in the infancy of this discussion in the Gemara. No pun intended. So the halacha is, and again, brace yourself. This ben shmoina, if a baby is actually a premature 8-month-old baby, harehu ke'even, there is a halachic treatment of muksa, like a stone. V'asur l'taltalei. This baby cannot be carried around. The mother can nurse the baby, but not for the baby's sake, but for the mother's sake. Rashi says, if she doesn't nurse, it could cause pain, infection, or other problems. And so we literally have no hope for this baby at that time, to the point where we treat this baby as absolute muksa. Admittedly, this language is disturbing.
Yeah.
So before we get too disturbed, I want to show you what Tosfos says. Ben shmoine hareyu ke'even v'asur l'taltal. Niruliri, this is Tosfos. The achshav muter l'taltal kol tinoikis. Today, there is no such thing as any baby born that would be treated as muksa. She'ein anu b'kiyim. We are entirely not proficient on knowing a true ben ches, a baby that is truly not viable because they are premature to the point where they are not going to survive. V'kulam k'may safek ben ches, safek ben tes. Every baby that's born is halachically considered as a safek if they're premature or fully to term, because we have no clue. And Dr. Hammer, Tosfos asks your question. Again, it's possible that the nuanced way that Tosfos brings this out is not precisely reflective of our understanding today of medicine, but it is broadly reflective of Dr. Hammer's early question. And sometimes a woman becomes pregnant right after they went to mikvah, which would be approximately 2 or a little less weeks from when they got their period. And sometimes they would not become pregnant from that. Maybe it would be a whole lot longer. And therefore, we have no idea. We have no way to determine exactly if the baby is 7, 8, 9 months. So again, the Tosfos at this point, without saying it, is saying that maybe circumstances were a little different in the time of the Gemara. Maybe then they had a whole lot more clarity. Somehow, we went from the very scientifically educated time under, and then now Tosfos is talking about in the dark age, in the times where there was very, very little medical knowledge. So I don't know what's really going on over here. Maybe Dr. Stamler can help us understand the contrast of the way medicine was in the time of the Mishnah, 200 under Roman rule. There was probably a lot of medical ideas, and then a lot of those ideas, true or false, were forgotten from entirely, and so there's a whole lot less medical awareness. That might be following the Mahalach that Dr. Stamler, when he shared an article a while ago on the subject. Suffice it to say, whatever the case is, people at the time of Tosfos knew, and Tosfos and we say, we have no idea. Umutar l'moyle b'Shabbos mimonafshach. So there's no such thing as a muksa baby. And we are allowed to do a bris. As the Gemara is going to say later, afilu hu ben shmoina vada kegon shalei bal isha pamachas. There are times that we can absolutely be certain about the length of gestation of the baby. Again, this is a little bit of an optimistic statement, but if the couple was only intimate one time,
Right.
and they're pregnant, we can be certain that the baby was an 8 months in pregnancy. I know. You'll be.
Rabbi, they didn't have television in those days.
Shabbat shalom. I gotta go. It's getting too close to candlelighting. Shabbat shalom.
Mark, have a good Shabbos.
Shabbat
We
shalom.
are
Mark.
counting down till your return to Florida.
Yeah, well, 1 month from tomorrow. We'll
By
be
the way,
there.
Mark, just before you go, I want you to know yesterday was kind of rainy, but it was the first day that didn't feel entirely like summer. It felt like the temperature dropped like 5 degrees. So by
Yeah,
the
I
time you
heard
get
it
here,
was
it might
60, I
actually
heard
be
it was
nice.
69 this morning. Is that right?
Where?
In Hallandale, huh?
It certainly felt cooler. I don't know if it was 69, but it certainly felt cooler. So my point is we're getting ready for you to come.
Yeah, up north, we have a danger of frost.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos.
Shalom.
So let's see Tosfos. Afilu hu ben shmoina vada. This is an important line, as we're going to see based on the Gemara later. Even if the baby is absolutely premature, nonetheless, you can treat the baby like a viable baby. Im ein reusa b'sari b'tzaparnav. So Tosfos introduces what the Gemara is going to introduce later on, which is it's not just the length of gestation, it's not just the length of pregnancy. We also consider the baby's medical condition. We actually look at the baby. Does the baby look undeveloped? Does the baby have the appearance of a premature baby? And so before we get nervous, I wanted to show you that Tosfos right away, just to understand that there is a theory, but the theory, which is an important halachic theory, in action, in reality, this is not the end of the discussion. This is the beginning of the discussion. And the reality is there are many babies that are born prematurely that are very healthy and viable, especially if they're only born 1 month early. And so we're talking about a specific kind of baby, as we should keep our eyes peeled. Itmar, we learned Rav Omar halacha k'Tanakama. Halacha follows the Tanakama. In which regards? Rashi, Aliba de Beisil Damar in Sarch Lahatif Minadam Bris. Going back to the discussion of a baby born without an arla. So there's a machlokes if we give the baby atafa or not. Rav says we follow the halacha of the Tanakama. Let's read Rosh Steinsaltz. In accordance with Rabbi Yehuda's explanation of the dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they disagreed when someone was born circumcised. Since we rule in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel, you don't need to do a hatafa. So Rav says halacha ketanakama, the Omar in Sarch Lahativ Ben Adambris. So this seems a little bit like whiplash. We've moved like totally to a different topic, but have no fear, we'll return, God willing, to the discussion of the premature baby. But we're not giving the halacha of a baby born without an arla. Rav says no hatafa. Shmuel Amar halacha ke Rabbi Shimon Elazar, and Shmuel disagrees and says we follow Rabbi Shimon Elazar. What was the difference between? What does it mean Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon Elazar? We had two different interpretations of the machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Were they talking about doing a hatafa after a child born without a arla, or were we talking about doing hatafa for a child, an adult that's going to convert and doesn't have an arla? As you recall, we talked about King Charles yesterday. So Rav says we don't do, and Shmuel says we do a hatafa.
Thank you, Maria.
One last line in the Gemara, and then I have to go. Rav Ada Bar Ava,
Yeah,
it once happened. Rav Ada Bar Ava had a baby, and the baby had no arla. The baby was born circumcised, which in Jewish tradition is a wonderful thing. Tradition says that Moshe Rabbeinu, I think, was born without an arla. I think Rashi quotes that when it says that he was born, the house was in Smalek Kula Oira, the house was full of light. I think one of the things it says is that he was Noilad Mahol, among other wondrous things about Moshe's birth. So Adre Atlesar Mahalai. Rebberal, are you back with us? He brought the baby to 13 moyalim. So remember, we talked about showing to one moyal then another.
Right.
Ad the shavye krus shavcha. Holy cow. No
Wow.
moyal would give the baby a bris.
Yeah.
So the father did the bris himself. But he wasn't a good moyal. He wasn't a moyal, and he cut into the urethra.
Right.
Omar, he said, Tasili, I deserve this. The Abri Adara, because Rav says this baby doesn't need a bris. I insist on giving the baby a bris anyways. And now look, my baby's been injured. Ay. Rashi. Hadri atleser moyali. Sheatifu minadam bris. For leirotzim mishum the Shabbos havoy. Oh wow. The reason why they didn't want to do it is not because the baby couldn't have atafa, but they didn't believe that it's done on Shabbos. He harmed the baby. He says, I deserve this because I didn't listen to Rabbi who says the baby doesn't need atafa. I know. You're thinking he deserves this, but what about the baby?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the kiddush was already ready, and
So there's a whole discussion here in the commentaries and the Chassam Sofer and others if Rav Ada bar Abba was actually a professional moyal or not. I don't have any. All right, we're gonna stop right over here, even though it's a little bit in the middle of the story. We'll continue to talk about the story tomorrow. So, my dear friends, androgynous, premature baby, and now a baby born without a foreskin, and how to treat the baby. All halachic questions, important questions, and certainly not the run-of-the-mill discussion that we're used to having in our Gemara here. But as we know and as we've seen, our Gemara in the end will cover every single topic. And my dear friends, every topic under the sun is in the Gemara. May Hashem bless our wonderful Chavura and all of Klal Yisrael, an abundance of good, of health, of happiness, of nachas, and good circumstances. Be'ezer Hashem, we will learn on Monday. Maybe it'll be shorter also. And then, of course, Tuesday, Erev Yom Kippur, there will not be a shir. Wednesday, there will not be a shir either. So we'll meet once, and then Matzah Yom Kippur. So we'll meet Monday and then on Thursday, I guess, right? So Yantiv schedule will probably continue to make our shiurim somewhat sporadic, but I think we can all agree Erev Yom Kippur is not a day that's going to work, and neither is Yom Kippur. So I hope no one has any major complaints. The main thing is, again, wishing everyone a wonderful day. And Rebero, happy birthday, a year of Mazel and Bracha, and a good Shabbos to all. Thank you so much for coming on.